Saba is a coordinator of the Learning Metrics Task Force for ITA, and together they're going to be presenting on the low-cost English medium private sector schools in Pakistan. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming them to the stage.
We often say less is more, but thank you so much for having us here and for carrying these conversations, which are indeed very rich. I've been hearing since I've arrived this morning in this conference. And I hope that what we have to share on Pakistan will further elaborate more dimensions of the issue. We are taking on data from the ASER, the Annual Status of Education Report survey, which, unlike India, works, does also urban as well as public and private. So other than just the public sector schools, we also look at private sector schools as well. So, much like what we are seeing in India, the landscape of public and private, we are seeing, the private sector expanding, but generally we see that the public sector is still a dominant education provider in Pakistan. However, its quality and its growth and governance are coming increasingly under constraints. 62% of the enrollment is in public sector education institutions and 38% in private, and it's rising. However, when we say that in urban areas, the private sector enrollment accounts for almost 75%, and it's growing. Sadly, the resources to education, which are a very big concern, and that's why the constraints in public sector continue to multiply, is that only 2% of GDP is being spent on education, and it is one of the lowest spent on education in South Asian region. And private sector, meanwhile, is galloping. So you're beginning to see both at primary and middle level a larger chunk which is going to private sector. And the question that we keep on posing is that, do we have the capacity to support this growth? Is the investment in private sector desirable? If the private sector is taking on and expanding and taking on so much of the enrollments, how do you need to address the issue of infrastructure and teachers and quality? Is low-cost private sector a public policy option? And we are beginning to see more and more the public financing through private provision, where public-private partnerships are becoming more and more a part of the mainstream public policy and the sector plan work which are emerging in all the provinces of Pakistan. This is a deepening trend. When we begin to examine the evidence on English medium instruction in Pakistan against school type, I think it's also very important to underpin this conversation in terms of what is the status of language policy in Pakistan, and many of you who have been working on this particular issue and for the region know that the quality of education is inextricably linked to the quality of instruction inside the classrooms. However, the issue of English as a language of instruction remains in a state of flux. There is a lack of conclusion as far as the language policy is concerned. Many of us who've been sitting and fighting out on these platforms are still caught up in a post-colonial trap where the aspirational levels remain, the logic and the science of language and communication is what it is. However, when it comes to the politics of the issue of language policy, we are not being able to make any headway. So there have been policy initiatives to implement the English medium in English medium instruction. We've had in the National Education Policy of 2009, and another one, by the way, much like in India, is under review for 2016. There is a huge endorsement that English should feature in the business of education and learning in schools in Pakistan. In the 2009 policy, whilst on one hand it gave a blanket support to English from class 1 all the way up, however, it did allow for flexibility for each province to decide what it would like at the primary level in terms of mother tongue teaching, first language, second language, and where would English come in, but particularly focus that at grade 6 or 4, they should be a focus on English, so children are able to cope better with post-primary and then eventually really post-secondary level challenges when it comes to language and the market. In 2009, the government of Punjab announced English as a medium of instruction across all public sector schools from grade 1 to 10. And there was a huge amount of debate and discussion whether it was the right thing to do, especially because the teachers could barely cope with Urdu, leave alone cope with English, and it was sort of done almost like an instant notification and said, in 15 days, all teachers will be trained to now focus on English as a medium of instruction in all schools. And we knew that would be fraught with all kinds of problems, but the government never listens to its experts or people like us. We became fringe phenomena soon, even in spite of our very loud voices and the fact that we do occupy a lot of clout in public policy. In spite of that, the government wanted to move on with taking this decision and saying that this may be an equalizer for public sector schools. If it's good for private sector, why not for public sector? And so be it. And so there it was. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, again, this is the province lying next to Afghanistan. They have just recently, interestingly, the same time as Punjab reversed, and we'll come to that, the policy on English as a medium of instruction. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, that's where Imran Khan's party rules. They decided that they are going to have actually English as a medium of instruction. Now that's another issue whether from the point of notifying announcements, political announcements, to what actually happens actually inside the classrooms is another story. But these kind of political statements in a democracy which is trying to see which dimensions really would win the largest number of votes, language plays a big role as well. And as I said, that there are big gaps between policy and practice. We realized that in Pakistan, and ASER had done another survey about 3 years ago, where we were looking also when we do the household data, we were trying to understand how many types of mother tongue are spoken really at home. And we, in that survey of 2012, gathered 2012 and 13, gathered 44 languages that are spoken. These are mother tongues spoken at home. And so there's a huge diversity of learners' backgrounds, the mother tongue and regional languages. So when you make a decision that you're going to use English as a medium of instruction, it is against these kind of realities, this sort of diversity, that those kind of decisions are being made, and very abruptly, without really much consensus. Also, the issue of teacher language proficiency and confidence, not just in English, but also other languages is often very low. And we see that again and again, and that is through the ASER surveys that we've been doing since 2009. Our last of the first round of surveys is just being completed in 2015. And we recognize that, it's the challenges that teachers face in language that lead to the learning outcomes for children. We also have been involved with the British Council work on English language initiative in Punjab, particularly Pili. We did the research for over 2,000 teachers to understand really what are the problems, how competent teachers are in public and private sector in their capability of English. And as a result of that, there was a reversal to Urdu as a medium of instruction, at least for up till the first 3 grades in Punjab in 2014. Amongst all of this, as we also have new beginnings of provinces wanting to go their own way now that education is totally devolved to the provincial level in terms of policy, curriculum, language, 2 provinces. First, actually, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and one of my colleagues is here who will be presenting tomorrow, Torwali Sahab, they pushed for the mother tongue bill in 2012. There's been a sad reversal in that too. But in Balochistan, they've had the Mother Tongue Act in 2014 passed. But if you look at our work from the Punjab Education and English Language Initiative, called PELI in short, and we were looking at the capabilities of teachers, there was a battery of tests, including the aptness test and so on. But when we look at one question asked to the teachers, how do you use English in your classroom? If you look at the blue bars at the end, and you saw 3 and 6 and 5%, teachers feeling that I use English only in the classroom, very few teachers in the public sector. Well, in the private sector, that was not hugely more. That was also coming to about 6 to 11% at best. And so one realized that actually both in public and private sector, teachers are not very comfortable on speaking English, and being comfortable with English as a medium of instruction. When we look at the rise of English mediums instruction in private school settings, and we see this as a demand and supply confluence. We see there's a huge demand for what is seen as aspirational English medium schools, and of course, lo and behold, there's a market response to that particular niche. So these schools, much like in India, are mushrooming across Pakistan. I was just talking to a young lady from Aligarh. Exactly this kind of a phenomena. English medium is really what everybody wants. And almost all private schools in urban areas who are charging fees have English as a medium of instruction, and I put it in quote unquote, because when it says that English medium, does it mean really English medium inside the classrooms? What happens? And Urdu is often offered only as a subject or another language. And of course, the quality of English language teaching and learning in these schools often coincides with the fee structure. The higher your fee is, the better the teachers you can technically afford, depending upon where you are and whether you have teachers available even with a higher fee. But at least there's a perception for the school entrepreneurs or edupreneurs who feel that they can perhaps hire or have more options of hiring better teachers with higher fees. However, what you see is that even when we are disaggregating fee by different fee bands, even as low as rupees 250 per month, you have almost 72% schools which are in English medium. So all the way up to, of course, 1,000 plus, and there you have 99% of schools which are and when I say 250 to 1,000, it means all low-cost private schools within those age bands, those fee bands. It doesn't mean that 1,000 means high fee private schools. It's still low cost, but amongst these bands. So there is a huge demand from 72% to 99% schools running even at the low cost fee bands as private, as English medium schools. If we look at the preferred medium of instruction between public and private, and this is, just to be able to share and embed the whole landscape for you, for Pakistan, before my colleague Saba shares the study with you, we see that there is a preference in the public sector. If you look at the left-hand bars, and you look at 5150, you look at primary and middle level, there's a comfort level in public sector to have Urdu medium schools. And then if you move along on the right-hand side, you'll begin to see that there is some preference at primary and middle for English, and perhaps a little bit more for bilingual. Whereas in private, you see definitely a more robust trend for English and for bi or multilingual medium of instruction and approaches, because I suppose that's what's come closest to the reality over there. So if you look at the low-cost private school space, and this is a little bit dated still, but things are changing so fast. Almost about 11 million children are being served, or about 30% or so of the enrollment. 20% of the total institutions currently in Pakistan belong to the low-cost private schools or affordable private schools. About 550,000 teachers, and that keeps changing also. And I just want to add that unlike India, our coaching is there, but it is not as rampant as it is here. And I do want to underscore that we do not have, we have a high level of coaching, perhaps 1 in every 4 children going in private sector to coaching, but not, and somewhere in some mega cities a little bit more, but we do not have the kind of prevalence of coaching as we have in India. But the low-cost private schools are really a very fragmented segment. The average student body is from 205 to 386. You have chains of low-cost private schools as well. And the student body again varies from 70 to 700. Those that survive will survive. Those that cannot survive will just end in another, die and come back again whenever. But English is always flagged as a medium of instructions. Most of the school operations are funded from the fees collected from the parents, and the fee range can be as low as 10 all the way to 2,000 per month, but there's an average of about 753 as we've seen from our survey. I would request now, so it just gives you a sense, and to please hold on to any questions that you may have. We'll come back to it later on, but maybe my colleague Saba will present the evidence on LCPS sector from Pakistan. Saba.
Thank you, Baela, for setting the stage. I will just present the evidence on the LCPS sector, followed by what our study aims to do and what are the findings. So, ASER Pakistan shows some trends of private schools, where we see that of all the sampled children aged 6 to 16 years, 61% of the private school children of 61% children in rural areas are going to private schools, and only 61% in urban areas are going to private schools, and only 27% from the rural areas are going to private schools. A similar trend is seen for the children aged 3 to 5 years, where 81% of the children in urban areas are going to private school, and only 46% from rural going to private schools. This is the same trend which Baela has also mentioned, at the start of our presentation that in urban areas, private schools are catering to almost 75% of the children. Similarly, when we see the low-cost private school trends from ASER Pakistan, coming to maybe the learning levels of children, we see that low-cost private schools are actually doing better than their government counterparts. 59% of the low-cost private school children overall are able to read English sentences as compared to only 45% from government schools. Similar is the trend for Urdu and for mathematics, where 67% of the children of low-cost private schools are able to read a story, as compared to only 50% of their government counterparts. So we do see that when government results from government schools are compared with low-cost private and private schools, private school children and low-cost private school children are actually doing a bit better. What our study is about is basically, Baela has already set the stage that on one side there is the public sector where the standards of English language teaching may be lower. Then there is the private sector where it's a bit higher than the government sector but still not very high. But then there's preference at least to use English as a medium of instruction. Then we have the policy level debate where in some provinces we want to go with English medium instruction, and in some provinces, after seeing our evidence from researchers and learning outcomes, we want to go back to the policy of using Urdu medium instruction. So what is actually happening is our low-cost private schools, which are English medium, catering to poor children of the country, are they offering better standards of English language in teaching? This is what our study is all about. We see that quality of instruction is perceived to be invariably linked to the medium of instruction at school, amongst other factors. Parental demand for English is high, which has led to the mushrooming of private and low-cost private schools. Because of the uneven governance challenges and other issues, the number of children attending private schools is increasing every passing year. So this study basically investigates the access and learning issues within the low-cost English medium private school sector by distinguishing between schools that are English medium and those which are not. There are two basic research questions. One is, to what extent are the low-cost English medium private schools affordable for the poor and the poorest quintiles of Pakistan at various fee levels? This is basically an equity question. Equity is an overarching goal. It has been outlined many times by the global development agendas, by national goals, that of all the children in a country, even this is an article 25A in Pakistan, which basically guarantees that every child aged 5 to 16 must get a quality education. So to what extent are these low-cost English medium private schools affordable for the poor? The next question is that if these are affordable, are children learning better in these schools? Are their learning outcomes higher than the government counterparts and those which are studying in non-English medium schools? So we see that learning levels in Pakistan low-cost private schools are higher on average than its government schools. But are these differences distributed equally across the sector, or are only the ones who are going to English medium schools doing better? The methodology that we use is the same derived from ASER Pakistan. We have tried to investigate the affordability and quality certification of low-cost English medium private schools. 600 households per district are surveyed in 30 villages of Pakistan, which are selected randomly, 20 households per village, 1 government and 1 private school in each village is surveyed. ASER is a national level survey. All provinces, including Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan, KPK, GB, FATA and AJK, rural are covered, along with 21 urban cities. But here for LCPS, we are mapping only those villages where information on low-cost private schools was available and collected. ASER Pakistan scale is like we surveyed 2,80,000 children aged 3 to 16 years. The children who are surveyed fall into the age group of 5 to 16 years. 165 total districts were covered, 144 rural and 21 urban. The ASER assessment tools are prepared for the following categories or domains. One is reading comprehension, words, letters, stories, which is in Urdu, Sindhi, and Pashto. Then is arithmetic, English, and general knowledge. So basically 4 competencies or domains are tested, which is reading, maths, English, and general knowledge. Assessment tools are very simple. It's called a floor level test, which is based on class 2 level curriculum for English and Urdu, and class 3 level for maths. So how have we identified this low fee private schools? Low fee should be based on affordability for the poorest by definition. Ilm Ideas, which is a leading organization in Pakistan, working on education in Pakistan and low-cost private schools in particular, have identified a low fee band as those who are charging below 208 rupees per month in 2014. So the study that they did in 2014 identified as those schools that are charging below 208 rupees come into the category of low fee band. There's another definition which says that 4% of income at poverty line, that is 600 rupees per month according to the World Bank. So it comes out at 240 rupees per month. So based on these 2 definitions, we identified schools charging fees at or below 250 as low fee private schools. Our sample divides low-cost private schools into 3 main categories: low, middle, and high. As Baela also explained, that high doesn't mean a high fee, but amongst the low-cost private schools, more than 1,000 come into the high fee band. The sample for ASER Pakistan, the sample that we conduct with the sample that we used for this study, 11,000 schools and 7,000 children are being 1,100 schools and 7,000 teachers are being 7,000 children are being have been surveyed. So the findings: percentage of children attending low-cost private schools by wealth quintiles. The wealth quintiles are poorest, poor, richest, and rich. A wealth index was created using data and regression analysis. So we find out that even the poorest in Pakistan are opting for English medium schools. Of all those who have been identified as the poorest of the sampled children, 73% are going to English medium schools and only 27% are going to non-English medium. Even the same trend goes for the poor children, where 77% of the poor have opted for English medium education as compared to only 23% who are going to non-English medium schools. Obviously, the percentage for English medium goes higher as we move towards the richer quintile and richest. 83% of the rich have opted for English medium, whereas only 17% of the rich are going to non-English medium schools. So this basically tells us that poorest are opting for English medium schools, or in other words, English medium schools are able to cater to the poorest and poor of the country. If we see the same trend by fee bands, we did it with wealth index in the previous slide. Now we look at the fee bands. We see that those who are going to the school who is charging less than 250, 72% have opted for English medium and only 28% for non-English medium. Now this is for the low fee band schools who are charging less than 250. For those charging between 250 and 1,000, 95% of the children have opted for English medium and only 5% for non-English medium. And obviously for 1,000 and above, there is no child who is going to non-English medium because the fee is higher. They are offering English medium instruction at schools. When we see the learning levels by wealth in each band, we see that 45% of the poorest children who are going to less than 250 school are able to read at least words. When we see the similar trend for English medium, we see a slightly higher percentage of children who are able to read at least words. We see a contrast here. For the non-English medium private schools, 45% of the children in less than 250 fee band are able to read words. But in English medium private schools, almost 60% of the children, of the poorest children against less than 250 fee band are able to read. So what does it all tells us? It says that even in the poorest quintile, 73% of the sampled children are going to the English medium low-cost private schools. Only 1% of the sampled children in the fee band of 1,000 and above are going to non-English medium low-cost private schools. This is about the affordability and equity question. That is private sector catering to the poor and poorest children of the country? Yes, it is. According to our very basic analysis, which has not taken into account other variables in differential treatment, we see that low-cost private English medium sector is catering to the poor and poorest. When we come to the learning levels, that are these children learning better than their counterparts in non-English medium private schools? We see that against the fee band of 250 and below, which is the low fee band amongst low-cost private schools, 45% of the poorest going to non-English medium private schools are able to read at least words. In contrast, 59% of the sample children going to English medium private schools are able to read at least words in the same fee band. So on the surface, it appears that low-cost English medium private schools are an equalizer. But are they really are? Is it a big question? Because it calls for further and deeper interrogation, which takes into account maybe other variables, differential treatment. We have only looked at learning benchmarks at the floor level. We have not explored higher order competencies, such as those that are being propelled under Sustainable Development Goal, particularly Goal 4, which is ensuring equitable and inclusive education for all and lifelong opportunities. And also the 7 dimensions of LMTF. LMTF learning, just to clarify, Learning Metrics Task Force is a global initiative which has basically given out a set of recommendations in 2012 that children or the learning outcomes should go beyond literacy and numeracy to include other higher order domains as well, such as what are children, are children able to understand social and emotional skills? Are they doing well on cognition and critical thinking? Are they able to take care of their personal hygiene? Are they able to understand science and technology? We have not incorporated that into our analysis. Our analysis takes into account a floor level test of grade 2 curriculum. But if we see the higher order competencies that are being propelled under the global development agenda and the LMTF dimensions, would the results be still different? Would low-cost private schools still appear to be the equalizer? Would children still do better than those who are learning in non-English medium private schools? So these are the big questions. As long as the conversation remains at the very basic level, we may be tempted to make for or against statements in binaries, which do not support the entitlement or capability functions of a successful citizen. Given the rapidly changing and complex demands for livelihoods and lifelong learning at local and global levels, this does merit more comprehensive and multi-layered interrogation. We have just set a stage for this kind of discussion where we see that maybe low-cost private schools and private schools are increasingly catering to the demand of English medium instruction, but then it is yet to see that what is the extent of their success and what can we do to make it sustainable. That is all from us.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting and informative presentation, I'm sure you'll agree. And I always find discussions around the low-cost private sector fascinating, not least because they do seem to provoke quite emotional responses in many people, also in academics, people who are very pro low-cost private schools, people who are very against them. So I think it's really interesting to be getting this evidence out of Pakistan and looking at actually what's the learning outcomes that are coming out of them. But I also agree that all of the recommendations that you've made at the end for further research that is needed, and I think that's something that's needed in India as well and in other contexts. So we have time for several questions, so if anybody would like to ask the speakers. Yeah.
Before that, I just wanted to add one comment again, that as the public sector begins to go en masse for low-cost private sector support, this is a question that's coming again and again in the debates as the new policy is being done, is to, how the government conceptualizes the low-cost private sector and how it decides to finance And is it going to and on whose terms will it finance, and to what extent will it finance issues of quality in these schools? So I just wanted to say that there's really a buzzing discussion that's going on right now as we speak, and I'm sure some of the questions from here may inform that discussion.
Absolutely. I think it's the same in India, that public-private partnership model, and who those private players are and how that will impact on what actually happens in the schools, I think is a big one. Okay, are there any questions? Yeah.
Thanks very much. John Simpson from the British Council, Sub-Saharan Africa. Just a quick comment and one clarification question, if I may. You mentioned that under the aegis of the Pili project, the data collected there was sufficient enough to convince the government of the Punjab to reverse its policy and to revert to Urdu medium of instruction in, I think, the early grades. And so from our perspective as an organization, I think that's very gratifying to know that we have been able to play a part in doing that, in supporting mother tongue, multilingual based education. Because sometimes we are misunderstood which promotes English to the exclusion. So I think this for me is a really good example of how we have been able to be influential in the other direction. The clarificatory question really is about the ASER study, particularly the reading assessment. I'd just be grateful if you could clarify the nature of that test. You mentioned it as referring to reading words, and does that mean that it's actually about their ability to read aloud? Is it the number of correct words per minute, or does it also include a test of their comprehension? How well do they understand what it is they're reading, as distinct from their ability to actually read words off the page? Because the latter could actually give quite a different sort of set of results, if you're actually testing for meaning or understanding, as distinct from just reading words aloud from the page. So I'd be grateful if that could be clarified. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Should I
Please,
respond?
yeah.
Okay, so just quickly on to the last question first, and I will do a comment on your comment. But so the Urdu or the Sindhi test goes from nothing to letter to word to para to story. But for English, it goes from letter to word to a short para with understanding. And normally the way the method works is, because it's clever, you take it, because the child can be anywhere from 5 to 16, you start in the middle so that if the child is unable to cope, say, with a word or a para, you go back and all the way back till you establish whether the child is at a nothing level or a letter level or a word level. So it's as I said, it's a flow level test, as we said in the morning as well. And so the methodology is that, and then it holds. But for English, it does do a little bit of comprehension as well. And we can share those with you, and they're online available, all those tools. But coming back to the Pili story, so of course, I mean, none of us dare have much influence over British Council, but it was no one lesser than Sir Michael Barber in one of his stock-taking sessions, which happens every 2 months in Punjab, as he sat there and the ASER result had just recently been out, and again the Chief Minister was depressed that why Punjab is not being able to make headway in quality. Well, they said, sir, not only does the ASER test, but even the PD test showed that the teachers are really unable to cope, not just in the public sector, but even in the private sector. So it's not just that. And I think that sort of did it. And they said, this AMA's decision to have English medium all across will go into another review. And soon the decision was taken that at least for the first 3 grades, it should be mother tongue, and then build on the other languages, including English. And I think British Council was also pushing for that. So I think that's how we all, in many ways, converged on this issue.
Thank you. Can we take another question? You can ask a question.
Because I think there's some people who are from different countries also, and I'm just wondering, you know, from our point of view, I mean, this is a burning issue, the whole issue of English language, and that as a medium of instruction, particularly in the emerging or mushrooming private sector. I wonder, you know, what is the story, say, in Sri Lanka, if there's people from Sri Lanka sitting here, or if there are people, you know, sitting from Bhutan or somewhere, because I think that's such a, I mean, we also are trying to find out how other countries may have resolved this issue. In our part, we are not being able to make a decision on the issue of language. There is no such thing as a language policy in Pakistan. So currently that's what we are really suffering from, and trying to push that, you know, if their language is not right, how will the child ever feel competent as, you know, as the child becomes a citizen or a youth or anyone, because this is, the learning challenge is a very big challenge, and the language lies at the heart of it. So if there's anyone who would like to volunteer or share with us.
What's your view? Do you feel English is better or mother tongue is better?
No, a lot of us obviously always feel that the mother tongue is much
Sorry, can you
better.
repeat the question also, then it'll go on the webcast as well.
I don't know.
I was just wondering, like, what's your view? Because here you did not show the difference between the mother tongue and English. You just saw the private and the public.
Because the story of mother tongue, why we didn't pull out mother tongue was there's only one province in the country which has mother tongue, which is Sindh. And the story of Sindh is a disaster. Nothing to do with actually the mother tongue. It's the entire approach and the totally zero investment to mother tongue support. So in Sindh, which is fought right from the beginning for its position on mother tongue, because it's the only province in the country which had mother tongue teaching. And the learning levels are worse than FATA. I mean, that's that border area between Pakistan and Afghanistan, where there's nothing. So their learning levels have now have plummeted to the worst. And it's, as I said, it's got nothing to do with Sindhi or mother tongue issue. It's the totally zero level of investment made in the preparation for teachers, in the pedagogy for mother tongue, in the support for mother tongue. So you have the story of this one province on mother tongue, and so if we pulled out those results that we have, by the way, in ASER, what do they show? So we, of course, feel very strongly as an institution that there is no substitute for mother tongue. Mother tongue is absolutely critical, but we have no evidence of mother tongue teaching or investment in mother tongue, proper mother tongue teaching, to share the evidence that actually by doing, you know, 6 major steps, you will see these as learning outcomes. We do not have that robust scientific evidence to say that a province invested this and look what this resulted in. No province has still decided, whilst there is the Mother Tongue Act just passed about a year ago in Balochistan, which is wonderful, which has got at least 7 active mother tongues, at least 7. There are many more, there are about 25. But the big ones. And if there's going to be no investment, a law will not do the trick. So you'll have a law, there are so many laws passed, but if there's no investment in mother tongue, you know, it's not going to do what we all want so passionately for mother tongue to do, particularly for young children.
Asma Lone, Lahore Grammar School. So I'm no foreigner and I have no expertise in what you asked at all. However, I've also worked with Lodhra Government School. I'm sure you are familiar with it.
Yeah,
it's a small town next to Multan.
Yes, yes.
Lodhra School. I went there with Tareen Foundation. They have adopted government schools and sort of turned them around by providing teachers, better salaries and equipment and all those. They have done wonders over there. There's no doubt about, I mean, I was highly impressed by what I saw. There were these rural children who were doing speeches, and they had grounds where rollerblading was happening, and so on and so forth. However, coming back to the question of mother tongue versus English being used as a medium of education, instruction. Sorry, you want to say something? I found evidence where I would agree with you that there were children who were doing very well in their academics at grade 9th and above because they were doing sciences in Urdu. They were learning all those terms in English, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and so on and so forth, but the rest of the subject was delivered to them in Urdu, which I think made all the difference. And I would like to be guided by you as well before I go next.
It's I mean, there are many experiments. She was referring to experiments, I think much like in India or other parts where there's been, philanthropic public-private partnerships for supporting rundown government schools and how transformations do emerge. And in Pakistan, the government is looking at pure public-private partnerships where the government is going to give per child cost to education management organizations, private sector, to come and support rundown public sector schools because they feel that they're not managing them better. Now, I mean, the arguments for those run both ways. Why is government giving up its space and letting others do it? And why is government giving up its job? But I think coming back to that other question that you raised was why there is a preference for what is seen. You must have seen the multilingual mode or the mixed language mode, because children do not feel, when there are teachers who say, you know, you are supposed to only do English medium instruction, and I saw in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa where they decided that it will be all English medium, that they could not speak even Pashto because they were coming from Dari or coming from another mother tongue to Pashto. Pashto was as alien for them as Urdu was. So they had to translate 3 times before they could get to English. So it's a disaster to go to English in that way. And so obviously there is a preference to that. But I remember in our work that we were doing in Balochistan, when we asked, would you prefer Balochi or Brahvi, another language, to be there, they said no. And the reason was, and we said, why? Because the kids speak that language and we should start from there. They said, but there is no market for this language. The market is Urdu or English. So I think those are the kind of decisions, that hard, painful decisions that parents make, and I've seen those even amongst the Rohingya Burmese who are in Karachi, for example, in the mega cities who've come, who have learned to forget their mother tongue so that they are not recognized, so that they can have access to market, so that it doesn't interfere with their chances of survival, you know, as migrant communities. And that migration and all of this has become a reality of the day. So the language issues are like burning issues. Just yesterday I was with the Secretary of Education in Sindh and I said, sir, do you know you have to make a decision on a mega city like Karachi with almost 20 million, 30 million people living in the city, how are you going to make a decision that on the recruitment of teachers? We have 40% children speaking Pashto, we have X% of children speaking Bengali, the others Punjabi, some in Sindhi, and you are only hiring teachers with one profile. And what will happen to all these children who are coming as displaced people to this mega city in search of livelihoods and support and survival, and we have no teaching profile to suit the needs of these children. So these are complex issues, and that's why we are aching in Pakistan as to why we do not have a language policy. Why do we not have a commission to address some of these fundamental issues? And I mean, I don't want to leave aside the issue of English. English remains an aspirational language. It is. I mean, I can't sweep that away. However, I mean, there is no clarity on it.
I think, sorry, can you just have the mic?
Until you have a market which allows non-English speakers to excel, you have to teach English as well. And only proficient English speakers will rise and attain successes. That's the reality. You cannot deny them this language at any level. You go online, you get to know the whole world through being online, and that's all in English. So there's no debate over there. Yeah.
We all agree with that. And you know, I was just in South Korea for the Incheon meeting, and I was with the diplomatic team there, and everywhere the labor market quota for each country there's there, but who is preferred? Anyone who knows English. So these are really realities, and yet we have the Supreme Court ruling. I forgot to add that. Just recently the Supreme Court ruling two months ago that everything, the official language is now going to be, including the file noting on the files and everything of the civil bureaucracy, is all going to be now Urdu. So there's a another story that's emerging on that now, in fact, all language, official language of the courts, official language of the bureaucracy is all going to be Urdu, even speeches now. So I think it's an interesting and a real scenario, a real melting pot. But I wish this conversation would go further for the country in terms of a policy.
Yeah, just one more question.
Yeah, well, it's a comment.
Okay.
Because you asked for examples from other countries,
Yes.
and I have a quite good example from Tanzania, where I've been working for many years with its private and government schools. You know that parents send their children there quite often to English medium private primary schools. And they think that this is the best for children. The reason why they send them sometimes doesn't have to do with the language. It has to do with that they're better resourced. Teachers are better paid, they're coming they're regularly, there are fewer pupils in class, they get textbooks, teachers get teacher training. All of those factors are extremely important. And we made an experiment in a village outside of Dar es Salaam, where the best school was a private school, got the best grades, and even poor parents tried to get money to send their children to that school. Then what we did was to have a government school give the children textbooks, the last 3 grades for all of the children, and had teachers going to teacher training, in-service teacher training. We couldn't give them higher salary, but at least they went to the training. And just those 2 interventions were enough for that school to become better than any of the private schools, got better results than any of the private schools. But what was a bit funny was that parents in the village started talking and saying, have you heard that that school has become English medium? It had not become English medium. And the teachers themselves also said, the reason why we're doing so well is that it's all Kiswahili. But we got these extra resources.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point to end on, that we've talked a lot about English and being English medium, but in fact that's often very much a label for a school, which doesn't necessarily mean that the curriculum is being transacted in English. It can be being transacted in multiple languages, but if the other factors that are so important for education are not in place, then the language is almost not irrelevant, obviously, but it's just one of multiple factors that will influence the learning outcomes. So we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid, because we've run out of time, and we have a short break now before the second plenary session. So thank you very much, Baela and Saba, for your presentation. Thank you very much.
That was fast.
I know. Thank you.